reaction to something which causes that part of your brain to be stimulated or causes you to release those neurotransmitters, kind of in the same way that, like, having an orgasm is, you know, the cause of the release of oxytocin in the brain. Oxytocin is one of the hormones that's associated with the feeling of love. So, yeah, there is cause and effect, clearly, but for you to say that the cause of that is some supernatural thing, some God that exists outside of the universe, outside of your brain, and that he's the one who's actually causing you to feel that, is completely illogical and a total non sequitur.
Well, no, it isn't. But I didn't say it was the cause. I'm just saying that if we're going to be objective about it, that we couldn't preclude it as being a possibility. Just because you assume that all things are measurable, seeable, weighable, you know, within the scientific method, so to speak, does not mean that things that are observed in the mind mean that they have chemical, physical causes. It could possibly be that there's a supernatural thing. And here's the problem with the scientific method. It necessarily defines God out of existence, because it assumes what's called materialistic naturalism, namely that all things can be understood in materialistic forms, or the phenomena can be understood by, such as motion or heat or reaction or refraction, things like this. You can measure and you can see, and you say, see, they're properties of matter. They are aspects of motion and energy. So therefore you assume and you define all things by that. Then by definition, God is excluded from that. And that's the problem.
Well, I don't think that that's a problem. That's the way that science operates. It would be a problem if science just said, well, who knows what could be causing this? At the root of all of these things could possibly be this supernatural entity. That would be a problem, because that goes against everything that science stands for. So science is about studying the natural world using observation and experimentation.
Excellent.
If your God cannot be observed or experimented upon, then it is outside the realm of science. It's outside the realm of science because there is no material evidence pointing to it.
Excellent.
So, you're kind of like making my point for me.
Oh, but you're helping me along, believe it or not. So if that is the case, and I would agree, then how would you find out if God does exist? What kind of things would you look for to determine that there might be some supernatural involvement someplace? Something that, I'll help you out, something that would not comport with a scientific inquiry. Right? Say a resurrection, or let's say...
if there was any evidence that the resurrection actually occurred, then, that would be something that would potentially point to some unknown phenomenon. But there is no evidence that the resurrection actually occurred. There's no evidence for any of the so-called, the supposed miracles of the Bible, that they were anything more than, fantastic stories and myths that people told. So, that's more of a reason to not believe in any kind of supernatural being, because everything that we observe tends to follow certain laws and makes sense in the scientific worldview, whereas in your worldview, nothing makes sense because anything's possible and everything could be coming from the purple snarf widget on the moon.
Actually, that's incorrect. My worldview, the Christian worldview, does not say anything is possible. Not at all. We conclude and we hold that God is consistent. He's perfectly logical. He's holy. He's righteous. And he will not be inconsistent. He cannot make mistakes, nor can he lie. In fact, it is the Christians who, the past 300-400 years, who developed the scientific method that you're talking about, because they assumed to begin with that because God existed and he was absolute and consistent, that we could depend upon nature to be the same thing. And so they would look with that assumption.
Okay, so what's your evidence for all of these claims that you're making about God?
I haven't made any claims yet.
That he has all of these attributes.
I haven't made any claims yet.
Well, no, you did. You just said that, God is perfect and God cannot tell a lie and that he's all-knowing and all of those things. You just said that.
I've assumed in our discussion the validity of the Christian God, because I'm not going to argue the validity of anything else. But I haven't made any claims like there is a God. I said, he's holy, he's this, he's that. I'm just assuming the Christian perspective, which I kind of assumed you would assume that I'm going to be doing. Now, I would assert...
I'm just saying, but, if you're going to... claim that this God operates in our world in some way, even insofar as causing your brain to, experience, a certain emotion, or causing the creation of all of these things, what's your material evidence for all of the claims that you're making about the God that you believe in? Because wouldn't he leave some if he did actually interact in our world?
I don't accept that you have to have material evidence. You see, if I were
then what other kind of evidence is there?
There's historical evidence.
Okay, well, why don't you tell me what your historical evidence is?
Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
Okay, well, what's your evidence that those aren't just stories?
Not just stories? What do you mean by just stories?
Or anything from the Old Testament, or all of the attributes that you're giving to God. What's your evidence for that?
I'm not sure I understand your question. What do you mean by the evidence for it?
What are you using to make those claims?
Well,
what kind of evidence are you relying upon? Is it just your personal feeling?
No, not just.
Where is it coming from?
Well, I believe that the Bible is ancient, the Old Testament written before the New Testament, that can be verified, and that the New Testament documents are reliably transmitted from then to now, and that the best and most logical explanation to account for the historical writings of the Gospels and the book of Acts, according to Occam's razor, simply is that these events really did happen as they are told and recounted there.
Well, I wouldn't agree at all that Occam's razor is really supportive of that.
Sure, the simplest explanation is the best. Usually, doesn't mean it's always true.
No, it's not quite that simple. It's the simplest explanation. It's the explanation that requires the least amount of assumptions. Okay, so let's assume that Jesus really rose from the dead. Then that would account for the writing of the Gospels, the behavior of the apostles, the change of Paul. Okay. Yeah, except for the fact that it goes against all of the other evidence in the way that we know that the world operates, not to mention the fact that the simplest explanation would be that it was just a story, because we've got countless thousands of examples of people making up completely fictional stories.
The problem of induction right there. Okay? And that's between you and me. You know what that is. That's not a good argument for you. Why is it that the gospel stories are not valid? Why is it that it cannot be possible that Jesus rose from the dead?
There's no external corroborating contemporaneous evidence.
Well, wait a minute. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts are contemporary corroborating evidences. See, a lot of people make the mistake of saying, it's in the Bible, it's not valid. Well, wait a minute. That they are written by the documents are written by the people who were there. Why isn't that
and all
valid?
of them are anonymous. None
no,
of
they're
them
not.
Are like source, like they don't explain their sources.
No.
None of them. All of the things that we use to determine what is historically accurate is missing.
Really?
From the biblical documents.
Oh, you mean so?
That's why they're not considered to be historical documents.
That's amazing. So Jerusalem didn't exist, I guess, and Nineveh didn't exist, and
okay. Well, so Atlanta existed, so Scarlett O'Hara must be real too.
Well, the thing is that when you have a non-fiction or a fiction book that you know is written on a fiction level, you don't put it in the same category as when it's historically validated. Now, you know that the archaeology evidence does support the New Testaments, right?
I know that the archaeology evidence supports the existence of Jerusalem. I do not know that the archaeology evidence supports the existence of this supposed Jesus character.
Well, how do you have archaeological evidence of that? It's a historical issue, so you must apply historical criteria.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't do what you think for for Alexander the Great. You see, give me the documentation, give me the bones, give me this.
Okay, sorry.
Right? You would not use a scientific method on a different category, would you? Huh? Are you there?
Sorry, I did not hear what you just said.
Oh, sorry. You see, history is judged differently than how light refracts through a lens. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
You would not use the same criteria for both, and to do so would be a great mistake. So
Light is still refracting through lenses right now. We can look at it right now. So obviously history is different, but history is no less scientific in its methodology in the way that we determine what is historically valid and what isn't. So you use the example of Alexander the Great. the reason why we know that Alexander the Great actually did exist is because there